Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of TBR. I'm George Binns. And as you notice, it's still election season here in Beverly. And we have as our guest this evening Todd Rotondo, who is the existing Ward 1 City Councilor and running for re-election. Welcome, Todd.
George, it's nice to be back. It seems like we were just doing this a few months ago, right?
Yeah.
It seems like the never-ending election cycle.
I know. It's going to be a fun season. And so I guess you've been out knocking on doors and getting signatures on the papers. And I guess the question is, what are you hearing from the constituents? What are they interested in?
Well, it's the same usual, concerns. It's the education. We've seen a lot of action in the last year over that, between MCAS scores or the funding of the public schools. Then now we're seeing all of the road work being done, and so that's also, there's pros and cons, right? We've been pushing to get more roads done. The city's now, putting considerable amount of money into the roads, but now all the construction's happening, which is creating a lot of inconvenience, right? So it's almost, we need that magic wand to have it happen overnight and wake up and it's completed. I live in Ward 1, I work in Ward 2, and I get the Cabot Street project. It's finally coming to fruition.
Yeah.
So, we want all these roads to get completed, and the transmission line was such an inconvenience that needed to be done. And now the city's coming and repairing the roads or replacing the pavement where need be. And so now it's a lot of detours to be detoured to know where we're going.
Yeah.
So that's another concern where I'm hearing right now. And then obviously always is the affordable housing. Those are the three things you're always going to hear about, right?
Yeah.
As a city councilor, we were also just finished budget season, right?
Yeah.
And so we're hearing from our own budget analyst, Jerry Perry, that, fiscal 27 is going to be even harder, right? And so there'll be some interesting things going on to see how that's addressed. As you may have heard, if you've watched them, any of the budget hearings, Councilor Feldman and Council President Flowers had alluded or even mentioned about the fact of proposing and working with citizens and creating a committee to do a Proposition 2.5 override, looking into it, right? And specifically, I think they had said it was to look at, addressing our school budgeting in as well as the infrastructure, two of the things I just mentioned. So right now, knocking on doors, I did it for, I ran for a previous office, and that seemed to be, constantly going. We started in January, and it finished in March for me. And then it was now transitioning to the city council work, which never stopped, but then it was getting out the signatures and for that. And, being a part of the community, for me, the campaign season's always been that way. So, the same concerns that we're hearing, we know that, federal level fundings, the way they're coming to the state and then coming to the city is always, what's grant funded, what's not going to be funded. And so we're always playing, conservatively to make sure that certain projects are going to be funded.
Yeah. So basically, I guess the concern is right now that we're good for 2026, and the budget is already set. Everything's going to happen. And the way I hear it is that if we continue with the same rate of spending, we can't raise the taxes enough because of the Prop 2.5.
Right. So, we have certain parts of the budget that are fixed costs, right?
Yeah.
So we have salaries, health insurance, pension, OPEB, which is the other pension liability. Those are set costs that are considerably the biggest portion of the budget. The discretionary part is where, capital projects, we have a debt schedule that we've already been responsible. And that actual debt capacity has come down, which is sort of like our monthly mortgage or annual mortgage payments, right? So we have a capacity level of a certain amount. But when, our insurances are increasing at a 10 to 15% rate, or, we're seeing salaries going up, and those are going up, 3%, say, annually, and that's the biggest part of the budget. We need to somehow live within the means, which we're doing, which is why we were able to sharpen the pencil. And I shouldn't say we, but the administration sharpened the pencil, proposed the budget. We had a few budget line items that we wanted to cut, and some of us voted for them, some of us didn't. But the reality is there wasn't a ton to trim off this year's budget, and as in years past. Even our own budget analyst, concurred. We all know that the new growth money that came through, the lion's share of that, or 96% of that, went to the schools because it needed to be funded to make sure, is what we're hearing in the mayor's office heard, that there's not enough funding going to it, right? And so the lion's share of new growth went to the schools between Essex Tech and as well as our own, the Beverly Public School System, which then left every other budget, every other municipal office with 100 and something thousand to divvy up to pay for different things, right? And so we saw that our roads and sidewalk budget, which was, historic in the last several years, $2.5–3 million funded, became zero funded, which meant, the mayor proposed free cash, which was the $3 million. And then we had the $3.25 million from National Grid, and then the state, Chapter 90 money, which gave us a little over $7 million to do all these roads that we're doing right now. And I still hear, and, the night before the budget hearing, I got a lot of phone calls, emails, texts from at least 40-plus constituents from outside of my own ward about the budget of the school department. And we don't have the authority to manage the school department's budget. We either can approve the budget or decrease their budget.
Yeah.
There was no appetite to decrease the budget. But, the Education Reform Act of '93 doesn't allow us to manage the budget. We can't cut line item to line item. We can recommend, suggest, but it's not like if it's the police department in front of us, we could cut, say, cars. You can't fund that line. We could cut that line. Or the mayor's office, which several positions were proposed to be cut. We can do that, but we can't do it with the school department. So we're in, we're going to be in tight belt situation. I mean, you've been around a long time, as well as being, me being involved with the schools prior. There were years that there were a lot of arguing and fighting and screaming at the public hearings for the school department. And then the last 10 years prior to last year and the year before, it was fairly quiet because the economy was good, the money was coming. Even during the pandemic, with the ESSER money from the school department and then the ARPA funds from the federal government for the city side, the doomsday didn't materialize to what we expected, right? The money was coming through. Now, of course, the bills are coming due and the money's no longer there. The city, and I'll say the school department did a good job in preparation for that cliff when that money was being shut off. These positions that were created for a short-term contract of 1, 2, or 3 years was definitely in regards to out of the pandemic and addressing situations. Those situations haven't necessarily gone away. And I think we need to really make sure that we continually concentrate on those. Yeah,
one of the things that I think bothers me and probably bothers a lot of people when you go online and look at a rating for the Beverly school systems, NISH is one of the sites, or U.S. News and World Report has a rating. And you look at the scores of the students, and they're barely at 50% in the elementary grades. They drop in the middle school, come back a little bit for the high school, but they don't get much over a 52, 3, 4%. That is very discouraging to think that we're spending all this money and the results aren't there.
Yeah, I mean,
and I think that this is, I think one of the issues. And again, it's not something that I know the city council can handle, but somewhere along the line, something's got to change.
I agree. I mean, look at data from various agencies, the news. I mean, DESE's a better, the Department of Secondary Education, that's your better looking at it. And even I know one of our, our citizens in the Beverly had put a comparison from 2013 MCAS to 2023. And the reality of it is you weren't comparing apples to apples. I mean, we know that the benchmark, and I know from my own experience prior to being in elected office, but being PTO president, having kids in the school system and staying on top and listening and sitting on those PTO president meetings with the superintendent, the benchmark continually got raised in order to challenge the kids, right? And then we had, 2.0 generation of the MCAS and next generation. So it had changed over the years. So to kind of compare from before to what it is now was not a real apples to apples situation. Of course, it's discouraging to see that the scores, we always want them to do better. We know that the middle school is the largest in the state for the 5 through 8 model. We know that. I will say I was never a big proponent of it, but it was in direct response to the elementary schools bursting at the seams. Again, the days when I was PTO president at Ayers, we were cleaning closets out for them to become an occupational therapist room or a physical therapy room that were closets, right? Because there wasn't, or we were taking the library and splitting it up to become an art room or a music room. So it was a necessity. And, I usually look, like I went to junior high school, I went to Immaculate Conception in Everett. And their models are K through 8, 7th and 8th top floor, 6 on the outer, and then the younger grades are lower. That's not a bad model. It keeps also the parents involved from K through 8.
Yeah.
We tend to lose the parents' participation when they get to the middle school because it's so large. But we can't have the 20/20 hindsight to fix that, right? We can't go and say, oh, we should build additional additions onto the elementary schools and then eradicate that. We can't do any of those. We've chose the model we have right now, which was what made sense for what we had to do.
Yeah.
But how do we address the situation that, everything and all the emails that I'm getting were more from the middle school, right? And some of them came from preschool as well. And full disclosure, my daughter's a preschool teacher. So I get to hear it firsthand from her, right?
Yeah.
But I had heard it from other educators and paraprofessionals. Similarly with the middle school is, we can all talk about the problem, but let's work to a solution.
Yeah.
And that's how I've always been, is what's the solution we can find to fix that? You're saying, we keep putting money, and we have put money. And I'm not saying in this situation, but we look at other school systems, Salem, Everett, Chelsea. They're gateway cities. They get additional, much more money per pupil than we do. But does that mean that their school system's better than ours? And I would argue to say no. And that actually speaks to our own educators. They work their tails off to provide an education to our kids. Now there are disruptors in the classrooms, unfortunately. And I'll say that, that changed where they had authority over these kids to make sure that they sort of behave. But that changed in the state where the laws changed for the juvenile laws, which kind of prevented actions to be taken to, discipline the kids. So that also, you could have 24 great kids and you could have a great classroom. And you could have a classroom of 16 and have one disruptor. And all you're doing is focusing on that one disruptor, and the other 15 kids aren't getting education.
Yeah, I've heard, there's one teacher I follow on one of the websites, and he teaches 7th grade language arts, and he describes it as herding cats.
Mm-hmm.
And a teacher's job is more like riot control kind of thing. And you and I both went through the parochial school systems, and they never have a problem twice.
No, and
it's a totally different world. Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's the other thing. Education's definitely changed over the years. We know that, and I hear it, and I grew up in it. I had 30 kids in my class, but I also had respect for an adult.
Yeah.
And I was raised by a single mother, and I also live by this as if automatically I'm wrong. Until I can prove myself, but my mother would always assume that I was wrong.
Yeah.
And even like with my own children, my son especially, who just graduated high school this year, if I get a phone call from an administrator, the first thing is, what did my son do wrong? And he told me the problem, and he's not calling me because he wants to be buddy and we'll have a conversation, but because my son did something wrong. And I tell my son, you have the right to defend your choice, speak to it in a respectful manner, but the minute you're disrespectful, you've lost.
Yeah.
I don't even care if you're completely 110% right. And that's where some of the problems, that's the big issue we're hearing with the school department, right? Is there's not enough funding, the kids aren't, like you said, the cat's being herded, but what's the solution to it? And, as a city council, that's not my job. My job is to advocate. I'm going to always be involved.
Yeah.
I came from, that was where I started when my daughter was in school. I felt being part of the school system and working as a volunteer capacity that I'm going to have impact. Not the most, but some impact, right? And work my way. And I've sat on other committees. As a city councilor, my job is to still be aware of what's going on.
Yeah. Well, you've got to
but
make
I have to stay in my lane.
Yeah, you got to make an intelligent judgment when you look at their budget and say, yeah, you're spending too much money on X, Y, and Z. Cut it,
Right.
and then send it back to them to.
Well,
then
we
decide.
can't. We can suggest it, right? And so again, I have my opinion,
Yeah.
and for me, it's tell me why why are we spending that much? I don't know the reasons behind it. You know, look, it's several years ago, and I was just having this conversation with someone today. It was a priority of the school committee with working with the superintendent to cut out kindergarten fees. And it happened, but that was a $700,000 operational
Yeah.
figure that no longer existed for the schools. And there's other fees. And I know, hearing from school committee Visnick, that they have since changed the fees. They've adapted accordingly to as costs have gone up. But nevertheless, those are fees that we've eradicated. You know, the state, fortunately, we now are able to give everyone free lunch, but we get reimbursed through the state and federal government, which is a great thing.
Yeah.
But those are priorities that were their priority. That who am I to say it was a wrong priority,
Yeah.
right? And again, it may not always be. And I'm not talking about this issue, but there might be things that aren't my priority, and that's where I kind of question what it could not be.
Yeah, so I mean that's part of the problem when you knock on the door and say, "How's everything going?" and the first thing they start telling you is, "I don't like the way the school system's operating." And then it comes around to, as you point out, they're talking right now about, well, maybe we ought to start looking into an override.
Right.
And what's the override for? You're back to the school system again as being one of the prime drivers of it. Yeah, there's other things going on. The elementary schools need to get re-roofed. That's
Right.
an ongoing problem. And as you mentioned, they're working on the roads, and it's a never-ending problem. So there's always, you didn't fix my sidewalk this year, how come? Or the trees need to be trimmed or something like that. So there's a lot of services that people expect, and part of the rationale or the reason that they're not getting addressed as promptly as everybody would like is the school system is very expensive. And I think people sooner or later have to recognize that that's a big drag on the budget, and it limits what you can do otherwise.
I mean, we have a pie of money that has to be split up.
Yeah.
The school department is one of many departments within the city. It's just the largest portion of this.
Yeah.
You know, we do need a good education system because it does attract people to the city, right? We know that factually. In my opinion, and not, when Mayor Scanlon was in and he, worked on building all the elementary schools, and then the high school became, and then obviously Mayor Cahill with the middle school, it did actually attract students back to the city. And, we're starting to see some influx, a little bit here and there over the years. But as a city councilor, my job is also to hear from the senior citizens who are saying to me, Todd, I've done everything right. I've paid my mortgage off. I try to live within my means. I have I have medical expenses to pay for, my prescription pills. I have to pay for food and utilities, and my taxes keep going up. That I know my taxes now become more of what my mortgage payment was.
Yeah.
And I have a fixed income, whether it be through Social Security or a pension. And so they're struggling to stay in their own homes. And even if the value of their home is greatly increased, the only way that benefits them is for them to sell it to, say, maybe a young family. But where do they move? Because we don't have enough senior housing, right? Our population is aging.
Oh, yeah.
We know that. But we don't have enough affordable senior housing for people to move out to another place to live, which then opens the inventory. We have a very limited inventory in Beverly. So it's the old supply and demand. If you don't have enough supply, the demand goes up, which is rents and the prices of our homes.
Yeah.
I don't know. I have my daughter's 28 years old. I have no clue. I was asked the question, what keeps me up at night? And the two things are my kids, right? I mean, those are the two things. Is how is my daughter ever to afford anything in this area? She's a teacher. She makes X amount of dollars. Yeah. She has virtual little debt, if any. And then my son, right? And how does he move forward in this workforce and how things are moving on? those have always been my concerns that I have to worry about.
Yeah.
So as a council, like I said, I'm always going to be able to answer the questions about the roads and sidewalks. And it may not be look, I have 2 bridges that the state is working on. We have the Bridge Street project, and we're seeing in real time. So interestingly, when people say to me, it's a waste of money spending to put this temporary bridge in, which was really in direct response to the conversation from the original community meeting back in October of, when the bridge was first closed. And knowing that the Hall Whitaker and then the Kernwood Bridge was going to be closed as well. Kernwood Bridge is closed right now.
Yeah.
So basically it's a peninsula for Ryle side, and it's very quiet. I live on Kernwood Ave, and it's only neighbors coming up and down. The signage is. But what we're seeing for the traffic regionally now is exactly what MassDOT was concerned about. Mass Department of Transportation was, it's going to affect the North Street traffic. It's going to affect Liberty Street in Danvers. It's going to affect 62. It's going to affect, seeing McPherson Drive is gridlock all the way back, and it's just a 4-way stop there. And then Rantoul Street is, having all the backed up traffic. And that's why it's become a regional. So for the state to put that temporary bridge in, yes, I agree that it would be great if they were able to go right to a direct permanent bridge, but from what has been explained to me and to others is that the process is longer to get a permanent structure permanent as opposed to the temporary, right? Because it's still navigational waters. So that's the infrastructure piece that I'm constantly hearing
Well,
about.
that's one of the big problems the city faces is that every time we want to do something, there's all these wickets we got to jump through.
Right.
And the classic one is when they were going to dredge the Bass River, and the contractor was on site ready to start digging up the sludge, and the Army says, "Time, you can't dump that stuff in the ocean," and everything stops, and nothing's happened since.
Well, there's a classic example that, unfortunately, that was an Army Corps of Engineer mistake. That mistake was they did the original analysis.
Yeah,
we hired we hired another firm for the city to, and they said that it in fact could be dredged, which then opened up grant funds. The city did its match, the state did theirs, and then all of a sudden, from out of nowhere, the 12th hour, literally the 12th hour.
They were on site.
Right, Burnham was waiting for the coordinates, and they didn't get them because they realized there was a mistake on the Army Corps of Engineer. Now, who knows if that's ever going to get dredged now? I mean, we know there's contamination in the soil, in the silt, right? It's not like the water, because the water constantly moves, but it's moving this contaminated silt.
Yeah, and you get back to the question about affordable housing. Folly Hill has been dragging on for, 5-10 years now?
Well, I mean, if you think of it, it started, 2016 maybe?
Yeah.
So around there, and
it went on a 5-year hiatus.
yeah, well, I mean, there were lawsuits, right? And so
Yeah.
the planning department had conditions, and the Reed's family trustee who owned the property and looking to sell it or develop it, they went to land court over time and back and forth, and finally land court sent it back to the planning department, and things needed to be revisited, and so now we have another suitor, right? Another developer coming in who has it has an actual development property in Beverly currently that's been managed, the Corcoran Development Company, which is Beverly Commons up in North Beverly, and they're looking to create 440 units. And the situation up there is, look at what you and I may define and most people define as affordable housing is not a $2,200 one-bedroom, two-bedroom apartment, right? I mean, those days of hearing $800 to $1,200 apartments, studios, whatever, those are gone.
Yeah,
unfortunately, right? And I look in what my mortgage is what we consider. My mortgage is low. I'm fortunate, but I've been paying it for 30 years.
Yeah.
The young people right now, I can't fathom looking at my daughter spending anywhere from $22,000 to $4,000 for rent. But that's what they're going for in Beverly. The Folly Hill project, they're doing their due diligence. I think they've finally gone through the parking and traffic situation where they've identified and done all that. I know that the states come in and the Environmental Protection Agency, one of the things is to look at the impact on the intersections and So that's all been going through the process. And now they're moving forward to the next step. And who knows if it's, what it will look like. One thing that came out of it, and I will say I advocated for this, was it's a food desert up there. It's geographically secluded. And if this development to go through, to at least have consideration for commercial space to create some sort of a convenience store, right?
Yeah.
Which would cut down on traffic, how many people have to go in and out. And at first they hesitant to do it because other models in other parts of the state that they felt it didn't work. But this is a unique situation.
Yeah.
And then they're also looking to maybe give some additional funding to the transportation efforts. Now, as a city, we can put conditions. We can't stop them. We've already tried that.
Yeah.
We tried changing the zoning, which the zoning changed, but they submitted their plans to freeze the zoning for the 8 years, which is why that time is ticking. Or 7
Well,
years.
we need the housing.
Oh, I mean, look
Yeah,
at that's a supply and
the fundamental
demand.
problem. We
Right.
need more housing, and is it going to take the burden off of the teachers who are trying to get something? Probably not, but every little bit helps.
Right.
And by the way, we're down to the time when you turn around
Wow.
and say, "Hey,
George,
vote for me. You're on."
Look, I'm running for Ward 1 City Councilor, running for re-election for that matter. I hope to earn your vote again, as I've always said, and make myself readily available to you. My cell phone's out there everywhere. If you can't get me by a cell phone, come down to the restaurant. I always have coffee hours there. Please stop by. I'm here to help you guys, and I hope and get your vote for this year's election. And George, thanks for having me again.
Yeah. So as the campaign goes on later on, we get closer to the election. You want to come back and we should give us an update as what's going on in the city.
Absolutely.
I'm especially interested in what's happening with the taxes because I just looked at my assessment and it went up 10%. And this whole myth about 2.5% tax increase, that got explained a couple of shows ago, and now I understand a little bit better what's going on.
Yeah,
And I think that's
a
the
whole
big-
nother show, right?
Yeah, I think that's the basic interest is what's really going on. And I thank you very much for helping us understand it.
George, thanks for having me again. I look forward to seeing you again.
Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for watching us this evening. And as I mentioned, if you've got any comments, my email address is in the front credits and the tail end credits. Send me a note. And if you've got a longer statement you want to make, there's room for you here at the table. And stay tuned. We'll be doing more of these.